Yes or no to this statement? When it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds. The state of the online debate. That is what we are debating here tonight. Welcome from Intelligence Squared US. I'm John Donvan. We have four superbly qualified debaters, 2 against 2. And what we're touching on here, well, it starts with this, a sampling of this, and see if it's familiar. This is a recent exchange among Wall Street Journal readers who are posting to each other about healthcare, or actually posting at each other. Glenn the liberal just had his argument attacked by David the conservative. Glenn gets mad. One wonders how you can even press the keys on the keyboard. Please just go away. David responds, now I know you're a liberal because liberals are rude and will not listen to any reason. A guy named Kevin joins in the attack, and he tells Glenn to read up on economics and civics. Glenn tells Kevin, put this in your pipe and smoke it, you pseudo-intellectual rube. From nowhere, a guy named Mark weighs in, and he tells Glenn that he is intellectually challenged and advises him that he needs to get some lithium. When it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds. Is that what we just heard, our minds closing out there? Or is it a great thing that these guys are actually out there engaging with each other at all? Our debate goes in 3 rounds, then the audience votes to choose the winner. Only one side wins. On the side for our motion, Eli Pariser, a board member and former executive director of MoveOn.org. His partner is Siva Vaidhyanathan, a professor and chair of the Department of Media Studies at the University of Virginia. Arguing against the motion that when it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds, Evgeny Morozov, a Schwartz Fellow at the New America Foundation and author of The Net Delusion. And his partner, Jacob Weisberg, chairman and editor-in-chief of the Slate Group. Now, in this debate, you, our audience, are our judges. By the time the debate is ended, we're going to have asked you to vote 2 times, once before the debate and once again after the debate, on the language motion and on your position on it, both before and after. And what we want to ask you to do now is go to the keypads at your seat. Our motion is when it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds. If you agree with it, push number 1. If you disagree, push number 2. If you're undecided, push number 3. Again, at the end of the debate, we're going to ask you to vote on the quality of the arguments that were presented here tonight. And the team that has the greatest differential between this opening vote and the closing vote will be declared by you, our audience, their winners. So on to round 1, opening statements from each of our debaters, and going up first for our motion, which is, when it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds. Eli Pariser, he's a MoveOn.org board member, CEO of Upworthy.com, and author of The Filter Bubble, What the Internet is Hiding from You. That book was the inspiration for our having this debate tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Eli Pariser.
Good evening, everyone. I find myself arguing that the internet is closing our minds with a bit of regret. This isn't the place that I would want to be, and actually, as of a few years ago, I would have been arguing the other side. But I've come to believe that while the internet is incredibly good at getting groups of like-minded people to get together, think together, work together, that it's actually quite bad at bridging between groups of different people. And that the view that the internet is exposing us to all sorts of new ways of thinking and new ideas is kind of a dated view, that the internet's changing, and that there are a few big companies that would like us to hold on to that idea that the internet is still this kind of open place. And most of them are focused on the same strategy, which is gathering as much data about us as they can, and then using that data to give us what they think, what they predict based on this data and their algorithms we're going to be interested in. So, if you talk to these companies, if you look at what they're saying, it's very clear that this is a big part of the business plan. Eric Schmidt says very soon it'll be nearly impossible to see something that has not in some way been tailored to you. Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook says that in the next few years, it'll be anachronistic to visit a website that hasn't been customized to your personal interests in some way. They've read all of the studies that show that when you present people with information that confirms what they already believed was true, you can actually see these little bursts of pleasure happening in people's brains. And conversely, when people are presented with information that challenges what they believed, they get cranky. That's just the way we're wired. Now, to be clear, I'm not arguing that all personalization is bad. Personalization certainly can have benefits. I'm a Netflix user. But the question is, what are the driving motives behind the kind of personalization that most people use, and what are the effects of that personalization? And I'll argue that because of the motives of these companies, those filters that they're building are going to tend to surround us with information that's agreeable to us and not with information that's uncomfortable. So a few examples of what this looks like in practice. It looks like one person Googling Egypt and seeing lots of information about the Arab Spring, and another person Googling Egypt at the same time and seeing nothing about the Arab Spring. This actually happened. I've got the screenshots on my website. And I could run through a number of other anecdotes, but actually there's been a study, the only peer-reviewed study I'm aware of on the Google search results and the effects of personalization there, that shows that 60% of the search results on a given front page are usually personalized. Either they're in a different order or they're actually totally different results based on who Google thinks you are and what it thinks you'll be interested in. Yahoo News in 2007 was a gateway for 80 million people that looked the same. But now Yahoo runs 13 million different variations of Yahoo News front page every day, and they're different for each person. It's hard to even see. We don't know how tailored our view of the web is because you'd have to sit down next to someone else and look at the differences. So the object of this personalization is to get us to click more. It's to get us to like more, and importantly, it's to get us to click on ads. Google says that it's trying to provide relevance. But what is the most relevant search result when you're a 9/11 conspiracy theorist Googling 9/11? Is it the conspiracy links that Google's algorithm would tend to promote? Or is it the Popular Mechanics article that would debunk that stuff? I asked Google this question, and they didn't really have a clear answer. So it's with regret that I think the internet is not living up to its potential. The way that most people actually use this thing isn't to broaden their political perspectives. In fact, the paths that we generally travel on online will tend to narrow our political views. Thank you.
Thank you, Eli Pariser. Our motion is, when it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds. And here to speak against the motion, Jacob Weisberg. He is a pioneer in online journalism. Jacob is editor-in-chief of the Slate Group, the internet-based arm of the Washington Post Company.
Thank you, John. Look, I'll concede that the internet narrowing our political perspectives is an interesting theoretical problem. But is that a phenomenon that's getting worse? And if it is getting worse, is it getting worse because of the internet? Eli, and I think Siva, is going to argue that because they think that because Google and Facebook are bad for us, it must be. But their skepticism about these tools we use every day is kind of the mirror opposite of the cyber utopians who think that new technology only brings us good things. But there are a lot of interesting theoretical problems, from the Malthusian food scarcity to the Y2K bug, that are just never borne out in practice. The Atlantic magazine gets a cover out of this every month, right? Is Google making you stupid? Is Facebook making you lonely? That's actually the cover this month. Is Twitter destroying your attention span? But cyber realists like Evgeny and me try to look at questions like this in a more empirical way. There's a Pew study from last year that showed, this is a quote, no evidence that social network users, including those who use Facebook, were any more likely to cocoon themselves in social networks of like-minded and similar people as some have feared. There's another new Pew study that says that people's social network friendships tend to cross political boundaries. The biggest study, which involved 250 million Facebook users, yes, it was sponsored by Facebook, but it was a good study, showed convincingly that most people share links from people they aren't close to. That is, we do reach outside of our personal circles for news. You can do a funky search that gives you weird results at any time of the day for a variety of reasons. But I did a test on this where I asked friends of mine, different parts of the country, different political views, different worlds, to search some parallel, very political, loaded terms like climate change. And basically, they got exactly the same thing. And I don't think that there is more than anecdote to support what Eli's talking about. I've looked at the studies. Now, since Eli wrote his book, Google has changed, and it now includes results from your social network and search returns. But Google added social searching in a way that actually specifically addresses Eli's problem. He had a lot of influence on this. You can turn customization off by pressing the prominent button that says hide personal results. And you can toggle back and forth if you're curious about the difference. On Facebook, it's just as easy to turn off customization. You change the sort option on your top stories to most recent. In other words, the filtering they do, these giant sites, is completely transparent and optional. I leave customization on most of the time because the social filter doesn't actually trap you in your own bubble. And take music just as an example I think we can all relate to. The reason I use Spotify, which is a social music service, is that I'm a little bored with the music I already know, and I want to be exposed to stuff I don't know, which I get through my Facebook friends. So back at the level of theory, could an algorithm personalize the news to suit your political perspective? I think it's much harder to do that than it seems. News organizations are really trying to do that. They actually haven't been very successful, which is why when you go to NewYorkTimes.com and I go, we get the same homepage. When I was a kid in the 70s, you found out about the world through TV networks, a couple of news magazines, local newspapers. There weren't any national ones. And it was a very limited range of viewpoints and voices. And if you want to create that kind of filter bubble, all you have to do is remove technologies before television, before radio, before newspapers. So personally, I get a lot of my news these days through a tool called Twitter. I use it as a filter for stories that are relevant to me. And what it does is the opposite of narrowing my perspective. Thanks to Twitter, I'm regularly getting news from global sources as well as American ones. I tuned into a lot of really interesting Arab voices during the Arab Spring. I follow China in part through an English translation of tweets from Ai Weiwei, the Chinese artist who's become one of the most important dissidents in the world today. Twitter's a serendipity engine. Finally, I don't think you need to look at all these studies or understand algorithms to make up your mind about tonight's motion. All you have to do is ask yourself a pretty simple question. Has the web narrowed my mind? Has it made me less tolerant of people I disagree with and less interested in what they have to say? Or has it exposed me to a broader range of voices, sources, and ideas than we all used to get when we relied on a consensus-oriented mainstream media for all our information? Unless you're convinced that the web makes you narrower, you should vote against tonight's motion.
Thank you, Jacob Weisberg. We have heard the first two opening statements and now on to the third. Debating for the motion, the author of The Googleization of Everything and Why We Should Worry, chair of the University of Virginia's Department of Media Studies. He's been called Google's gadfly, Siva Vaidhyanathan.
Thank you. So the internet has so narrowed my mind that I didn't hear a word Jacob said. So in these brief comments, I'll explain what Eli and I mean by the internet, as invoked in the resolution, and what we mean by politics. And I'm going to convince you to support the resolution. First, try to remember 1999, the days of AOL, the days of Prodigy, the apex of our long national nightmare of peace and prosperity. In 1999, Thomas Friedman wrote these words: "The internet is going to be like a huge vice. It's going to keep tightening and tightening that system," meaning the system of globalization, "around everyone in ways that will only make the world smaller, smaller, and faster and faster." Well, Thomas Friedman could not have been more wrong. He's been exactly that wrong many times, but never more wrong. Now, in 2012, it's clear that there is no such thing as the internet, capital T, capital I, as Friedman and others so often described in the 1990s. There is no equalizing force, great democratizing force. There is no global network of networks that unites us all and gives us all equal voice to interact with each other across borders and across classes, for that matter. In fact, the alleged network of networks is, in 2012, balkanized, nationalized, compromised, anesthetized, supersized, circumcised, and hypnotized. It's far from global, and it's getting less so every day. The online experience of a person sitting in Turkey is so different from the online experience of someone sitting in India, and so different from the online experience of someone sitting in Iran or someone sitting in China. And we're talking about more than censorship, although in many of those countries, online censorship is a serious and crippling issue. We're also talking about platforms, the platforms that people use, the platforms that governments will let people use. The rise of kill switches is something we have to take into account as well. Kill switches that we saw a year ago in Egypt to wipe out internet communication in an instant. We've seen experiments in kill switches in China in early 2012, and we've seen people like Senator Lieberman even propose them in the United States. Internet technologies amplify so much of what we already are and what we already want, and the fact is, we're pretty provincial animals. So you add the internet to it, we just double down. So here in 2012, or now in 2012, we are not all holding virtual hands with our Facebook friends across the globe singing "We Are the World." There is no coordinated global movement for justice. There's no sophisticated online debate about our collective human fate or even our basic human needs. The dominant powers governing our digital experiences, the state, for instance, in China, or corporations in Brazil or the United States, are not interested in such matters. More often than not, these powers seduce us into shallow consumption, consumptive behaviors like shopping or giggling at cats or clicking on cows. We could build platforms that enhance Republican deliberation and extend cosmopolitan perspectives. We just haven't done that yet. We've been really busy clicking on cows. But all that takes work. It takes real human work in addition to invention and imagination, real human effort. But the first step to realizing that is to recognize what's happening. When it comes to politics, the internet, most importantly, how we experience the internet, is closing our minds, one cow click at a time. Please vote for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Siva Vaidhyanathan. Our motion is, when it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds, and our final debater against the motion, he comes from the former Soviet Republic of Belarus, something that has shaped his interest in the internet's role in politics. He is a Schwartz Fellow at the New American Foundation and author of the book, The Net Delusion. Evgeny Morozov.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad that Siva has chosen to debate with Thomas Friedman rather than with us. But I'd like to begin with a few lessons from history. First, technology always plays the scapegoat whenever it comes to debates about the closing of the American mind. Remember Alan Bloom and his best-selling book, The Closing of the American Mind in the 80s? Well, let me remind you, Bloom has actually argued that the closing of the American mind occurs because of CD players and headphones. And he actually argued that those might incite teenagers to kill their parents. We know what the late Alan Bloom would have made of the iPad. Why his reactionary torch is now being carried by the liberal crowd from Move On is beyond me. I think this is a fairy tale for many of the reasons that Jacob has outlined, but let me also provoke and give you 3 examples of how filters may actually enhance our political culture. So let's take Twitter. Many people think that Twitter, unlike Google and Facebook, does not engage in customization and filtering. This is actually not true. Twitter does hide certain types of messages. Thus, if you follow me, but you don't follow Siva, and I send Siva a public tweet, you will not see that tweet. Just think about it. You choose to follow me, and you probably expect to get all of my messages, but you're actually not seeing my tweet to Siva. And mind you, Twitter made that filtering decision on your behalf. Is it paternalistic? Sure. But is such paternalism justified? Well, take my case. I follow more than 2,000 people on Twitter, and I'm very happy with the breadth of news that I get. But if I had to read every single conversation that these 2,000 people have with thousands of people that they know, but I don't know, I would have never managed to follow 2,000 people. At best, I would follow 100. This is the beauty of it. Twitter's clever filter allows me to access more, not less useful information. Now let's take Facebook. It has 800 million users. Some of them are heavy users. They have 5,000 friends and spend hours on it every day. Others open it every few weeks and only have a few dozen friends. So Facebook has built this very clever differentiation. If you are a heavy user, it presents you all updates from your friends in the chronological order. Thus, the most recent updates from all your friends come first. However, if you only use it occasionally, Facebook shows you only the most interesting updates. The assumption there is that if you've been away for 3 weeks and you have only 30 minutes to catch up, why go through thousands of messages in a chronological order? To Facebook and to me, this seems like a reasonable assumption. Sure, we can have a broad philosophical debate on whether social networking is good or evil, but as long as we accept that social networking is a legitimate activity, we should also accept that filters make it better. Now let's tackle the elephant in the room, which is Google. Suppose I'm so keen on conspiracy theories that my blackboard is larger than Glenn Beck's. So I believe that 9/11 was an inside job. I believe that Obama is a Kenya-born Muslim, that climate change is a non-issue manufactured by the lamestream media, that the government is hiding the truth about the UFOs, and so on. In other words, I'm exactly the kind of guy that Eli is worried about. Furthermore, suppose that I became all of that before the filter bubble set in that great age of unfiltered viewpoints that we used to call the era of cable television. So now comes the filter bubble, and Google starts personalizing my search results. Thus, instead of seeing generic search results about, say, 9/11, actually see that some search results have already been endorsed or liked by my friends. In turn, when my friends use Google, they see the links that I visited and I liked as well. Now, this is the new mutual exposure. Why is it a good thing? Well, if you think that all my friends are nutcases like me, then we do have a problem, because through such new exposure, all of us may end up becoming even more paranoid. But let's leave Charlie Manson and the Unabomber aside for a moment. The way Google and Facebook map out our social connections, they try to be very comprehensive. We see links from people we went to school with, our colleagues, our relatives, and so forth. It's quite likely that many of these people will have radically different positions on 9/11, climate change, Obama's birthday, and UFOs. So my point with this is that a link to the report of, say, 9/11 Commission that has been endorsed by someone from my social circle is more trustworthy than a generic Google link that has not passed through a similar social filter. In other words, it's a possibility that people would now be paying more attention, or at least more respect, to positions they would otherwise find crazy and conspiratorial, only because their friends are known to endorse those positions. So, to conclude, there are many good concerns about the future of the internet. The death of privacy ranks very high on my personal list, but the filter bubble is not one of them. It's okay to hate Google and Facebook, but we should hate them for the right reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Evgeny Morozov. And that concludes round 1 of this Intelligence Squared US debate, where the motion being argued is, when it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds. Round 2 is where the debaters address each other directly and also answer questions from you in the audience and from me. We have 2 teams of 2 who are arguing over this motion. When it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds. The side arguing for the motion, Eli Pariser and Siva Vaidhyanathan, they are arguing that the internet is actually several internets, that they put up walls between the lands that are occupied by people of differing opinions, between nations as much as between liberals and conservatives. The team arguing against them, Jacob Weisberg and Evgeny Morozov, they're saying, sure, maybe these bad things could happen someday, but there's not much evidence that they are happening a lot yet right now. And besides, a tool that can and does connect strangers globally around the world by definition almost is a good thing. And that customization perhaps helps to organize the way that we think. So I want to put a question to the side that is arguing against the motion that when it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds. Jacob Weisberg, you said as your sort of slam dunk point to the audience, you have to decide whether you think the audience is closing your mind. But if the other guys are right, they won't know whether the audience is closing their minds, because if their minds are being closed, part of having their minds closed is not knowing that their minds are being closed. But they're saying that it's an insidious thing, that it's a stealth thing, particularly with the customization, that it happens in a way that it comes to you. You go through this process unawares. Can you take that on?
All right, this is the minds in a vat argument in philosophy, that if we were not actually embodied but have our minds in vats being manipulated by space aliens, we have no way to know. I'm not sure I can answer that. We live in a democracy, and it seems to me that we're all responsible for the information we receive, and not everybody engages in as deeply in different subjects. But the difference with the internet is we can measure it. We never knew who read the stories in the B section of the New York Times about Albany and the state legislature. On the internet, you know how many people click on them.
It's about 11, I think.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. But how many people were actually read to the end or even the beginning of the story before we had the internet?
Well, so take on, number one, Jacob's point that you're, I think, suggesting a little bit of snobbery here, that you're saying we all can keep up with things, but that there's a great unwashed public out there that can be deceived by the power of these algorithms that are telling them what needs to show up in their searches.
I merely meant that Jacob's test, whether it works for you, wasn't a good enough test, largely because you are just you, and you are not we. You are not a greater sample, right? So if we're going to be empirical, let's be good about the social science we deploy. That is the worst possible empirical test, what happens to you. It's almost laughable in its suggestion. So that can't possibly be the test when you address this question.
But wasn't your partner using that's what happened to me when I typed in Egypt?
Let's talk a little bit about the studies about this
Eli
stuff
Pariser.
because I think it's worth digging into this a little bit. There is one, first off, the reason that it's so hard to study this stuff is because the easiest way to study it is to get inside the black box of these companies. And these companies don't have any interest in letting people go in and prove that these companies are doing bad things. But it's very hard to look at from the outside, which is why there's just not many studies that haven't been, as Jacob said, funded by Facebook, funded by Microsoft, funded by the companies themselves. The one clear study on Google personalization that has been peer-reviewed is a study by a guy named Martin Fuse, and it's pretty clear. He looked at how a search history affects the personalization you get, and it's very clear. Again, 60% of the search results on the first page are different for most, for people who have a long web history in Google. But actually, I think the study that's the most interesting here is the Genskow study that Jacob was referring to. This was a study that was sort of initially described as a study that showed that people are linking to each other and that the internet isn't as polarizing as we thought. And the interesting thing is if you dig into that study, it actually arguably shows the exact opposite. What they did was they created an isolation index for each different kind of medium. And so the isolation index for cable news that study used was about 3.3. On the internet had a 7, an isolation index of 7. And so it's twice as polarized as cable news. Now, what's more interesting is that the study was done before the personalized internet. The other thing that's changed since that study was done is the rise of social media as one of the primary ways that people get information. And they did this isolation index calculation on people's sets of friends as well. So cable news is 3.3. The internet in 2007 in the Yahoo era was 7. And people's groups of friends was 30. Now, that 30 has become embedded in every experience that we have on the internet now.
Jacob Weisberg,
I read the same study. I was a little baffling, but it said the polarization index for newspapers was 10. Mm-hmm. So this, the old media is well beyond the media. I think you need to take all of that with a grain of salt. I mean,
but you cited it. I mean, this was the study that you were citing.
Right, exactly, and it doesn't show that the internet is the most polarizing thing. But I looked at about half a dozen studies for this, and I would have to say, just trying to be as objective as possible, that the preponderance of evidence, the studies I didn't cite, say that there's not clear evidence this is happening. There's no evidence it's getting worse.
It's fine to be talking about studies that no one but few people in this audience have read, so they all sound very authoritative. But I think you also have to keep in mind that a lot depends on what kind of information you're trying to access online. If you're searching for pizza in Manhattan, and I'm searching it from my mobile phone, and Google knows where I am, I would actually want 99% of the search results to be personalized, probably not 60. 60 is not high enough. In part because it's very obvious that what I want to do is to order a pizza, right? So again, if I'm searching for political information, right, maybe the ratio should be 10% or 5% or 0. So to say that there is 60% of information that's personalized doesn't say much, because it all depends on what it is that is being personalized.
Siva, are you arguing that the internet is closing our minds?
When you want to learn about anything complex, the worst thing you can do is subject yourself to a social filter. The best thing you can do
You need better
is
friends.
challenge yourself. The best thing, you're the person I retweet the most. The best thing you can do,
You need to get out of the bubble.
the best thing you can do is seek sources of expertise, seek sources that are particularly good at researching particular areas, use online sources that are focused in particular areas, like health, like science, right? That means call your librarian. That means talk to an expert. And that means go beyond asking a small set of people what the best way to explore a particular issue is. But for pizza, not a bad idea. And we can talk later, because I'll tell you. I used to
Why
live in
not
Sweden.
integrate 2,000 people that I follow on Twitter, one of whom is you? Why not integrate those sources in my search results? Why shouldn't I be able to see the search results that I liked if no one is concerned about privacy? Don't you think the links you share or click on are not smart or interesting for me?
I also think your opponents who are arguing against the closing of Americans' minds through the internet have also made the argument that this personalization and customization, the filtering helps you think. It helps you organize. It cuts away the chaff. It brings things down to a manageable amount of material. And I can see the appeal to that argument. So take that on, Eli Pariser.
Well, you don't hear me arguing that all personalization is bad or all filtering is bad. That's kind of a nonsensical argument. We're talking a lot here about Twitter, but it's important to remember that Twitter actually, it's hard to remember in a group of New Yorkers, Twitter is a fringe phenomenon on the internet relative to Google or Facebook. Twitter has a tiny, tiny user base compared to these other. Sorry.
Only 200 million.
Well, but the actual user, the active users. If you look at active users on Twitter, it's actually much smaller. It's about 25 million people, which is a lot of people, but not compared to Facebook, not compared to Google. And so, we have to look at sort of how most people are using this stuff.
Yes,
I
Jacob
just want to
Weisberg.
ask Eli one other question. I mean, since we're dealing with the interesting implications of this thing that I don't think is happening, how do you want to, what kind of regulation do you want to deal with this problem? I mean, do you want to say that Google and Facebook aren't allowed to filter in certain ways, or do you want them to become this sort of paternalistic gatekeepers that say, if you're searching for Lady Gaga video, you also have to have a little bit of this interesting study from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office?
No, I'm not suggesting that we replace the old media paternalism with new paternalism. I'm suggesting that if we built these tools toward the purpose of helping people get good information, including a diversity of perspectives, we could do that in a way that would draw on the internet's strengths. So I'll give you one example. Facebook, the main way that you propagate information across Facebook is with the like button. The like button has a very particular valence. It's easy to click like on I Baked a Cake. It's hard to click like on Massacre in Darfur continues for 11th year. And so certain kinds of information propagate very readily. Other kinds of information don't propagate at all. Now, without instituting any kind of objective paternalism, this is more important than that, you could put an important button on Facebook that would allow people to elevate the topics that they believed were important, as well as the topics that they think are fun and interesting and that they'd like their friends to see. So there are ways of doing this that are internet-y, that don't require someone in a room making these value judgments, but that actually lead toward filtering that helps us be
solve
good
the
citizens.
filtering problem.
Let me ask the side that's arguing that when it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds. For some concrete examples of this phenomenon that concerns you actually having caused harm to the body politic, what's wrong with having people entrenched in their own camps, angry at each other, as long as the political spectrum is covered overall? What's wrong with that? And what examples of harm can you talk about that have been caused by that?
Just a little story. When I was on the book tour for my book, I was on a radio show in
Eli
St.
Pariser.
Louis, and the host decided to make this big spectacle of having people Google Barack Obama, and call in and read their search results. It was a really boring radio hour. And the first person called in and the second person called in and they interviewed everybody and had people do a kind of read-off where they were both reading it off at the same time, and it was exactly the same. And I was thinking, this is the worst book promotion I've ever done. And then a third guy called in, and he said, it's the damnedest thing. When I Google Barack Obama, the first thing that comes up is this link to this site about how he's not a natural citizen. And the second link is also a link to a site about how he doesn't have a birth certificate.
That was a publicist, just so that you know.
Oh, I was wondering about that. But so, I think the danger here is that it's not just that he was getting a view of the world that was really far from, sort of the really off the average here, but that he didn't even know that was the view that he was getting. He had no idea how tilted that view was. And it's really kind of funny to me because if you talk to these companies and if you listen to what they're saying, all of these companies are very clear that personalization is a big part of what they're doing and what
for
they're
pizza-related decisions, they are very clear, and they say we don't want to do it for politics. We only want to do it for pizza.
Right, and the question is, can you trust?
But let me ring Jacob. But Jacob, can you? I think Eli left a pretty good image hanging out there of these folks folks truly not knowing how much they don't know and believing what they're getting and not understanding how slanted it is. That landed pretty well, I think. So can you respond to that?
But a guy who called into a radio show, I know the plural of anecdote is data. But, if this were really happening in the way you say it is, wouldn't there be some kind of decent study that actually showed widely varying results? As I say, I've tried to test this out as best I can. I've tried it, myself on a variety of browsers, signed in, signed out. Wikipedia always comes up first. Sometimes it comes up second. Wikipedia's vaccine entry is pretty good. I do not think there is actually the kind of variety you're talking about in searches done most of the time by most people. There is a social feature similar to Facebook and Google. You can turn off. You can have it personalized or not personalized as you prefer.
So first of all, defaults matter. The fact that you have to know to turn it off is a huge issue. There's a reason those social phenomena are on by default, because it's in those companies' interest to make sure that you do get personalized results.
But
that's
it's in
better
our
for those
interest. I
companies.
want it turned on.
But you might not realize that it's happening unless you happen to
But then you
tune
may
into
not
the
realize that you have
Customization
the
off,
personalized
it's right there.
option. Siva, it's a chicken and egg problem. You will not realize that you can personalize them otherwise. I don't see it as an argument.
All right, I'd like to go to audience questions at this point. We're in the middle of round two. Our motion is, when it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds. We did put out on Slate.com, who's our media partner, a request to them for questions from some of their subscribers. He basically makes this statement: the tiny minority of democratic citizens who are interested in political ideas and issues cannot have a discussion. They have freedom of speech, but there's nobody to speak to in the internet ersatz world of discussions, which only hides the problem. Do you agree that our nation needs affirmative action for intelligent conversation? I'll put that to Siva first.
Most definitely, but we're doing it right now, right? It means that we have to have foundations, like the foundation that supports this discussion. It means that we have to have universities and we have to have schools take these issues seriously and make sure that we are all able to understand the environments in which we operate, that we have to understand the nature of these platforms and technologies, and when there is a suboptimal result, we have to know how to correct for it, and if we're not happy with it, to invent something new.
Other side want to respond, or do you agree? Jacob Weisberg.
Well, I think the low quality of commenting is one of the big problems on the internet. It's one we've been very concerned with at
Jacob,
Slate.
can you just come a little
Oh, I'm sorry. We've been very concerned with at Slate over the years with improving it. The big breakthrough, I have to say, came from Facebook through a technology, an interface known as Facebook Connect, which basically brought identity-based commenting to every website. And it means that because people are themselves when they comment, they're actually a lot more reasonable, not necessarily reasonable all the time, but they don't engage in the quite the level of viciousness and ad hominem attack and just soft point arguing they do when they're anonymous. So I think partly this is a problem I'm optimistic about improving through technology.
All right, let's go out to the audience now.
I'm curious about either the growth of your audiences or the decrease of your audiences and the quality and the quantity of discourse that's been created over the past, let's say, 3 years.
Are they seeing minds closing?
Are they seeing minds closed?
Jacob Weisberg.
Well, I think I tried to speak to that in my introduction. No, I've felt personally just the opposite. I feel like I've never been in touch with a wider variety of viewpoints and people. And a lot of that is through social media, because people act as filters for you. When you find someone interesting, whether they're a personal friend, whether they are someone in a field you're interested in, whether they're in another field or just someone you admire, they bring you a whole range of things on Twitter or on Facebook. So no, my experience has been just the opposite.
I think my own case disproves that. I mean, I have an unpronounceable name. I was born in the middle of nowhere in Belarus. And the only reason we actually have the attention and the audience I have is mostly because of the internet, because of the Twitter stream I run, and because of active writing for online publications, and doing a lot of online research on Google Scholar.
Siva.
I have a really quick answer. Before 5 years ago, I didn't have such a thing as Facebook on which to engage in conversation with my friends. I ran 2 blogs, and both of them were maddening because every conversation I had was overwhelmed by harassing people who were merely there to disrupt the conversation, not there to engage in a reasonable and rational way. We call them trolls. And one of the reasons that I closed down my blogs is it was so maddening.
As opposed to taking lithium.
Exactly. The quality of discourse in the comments, plus the spam, was just out of control. On Facebook, it's a lot more comfortable, right? It's a lot more pleasant. It's because I never see people I disagree with. It's really lovely now.
Levi Osborne in Warrensburg, Missouri asks, is it so much the internet in itself that is closing our minds as it is the hyper-partisanship of these commentators, which so many people listen to? And by commentators, he's talking also not just about people who are online, but people who are also in television, who are blogging, and people in newspapers who are blogging, but he's talking about the blogging aspect of people with hyper-partisan points of view. Jacob Weisberg.
Well, I do think the phenomenon of increased polarization in Congress is pretty clearly documented at this point. That's happening, and I deplore it. I just don't think the internet has anything to do with it. I think the big drivers of that are redistricting, which put people in districts that tend to go one way or the other and fewer that swing back and forth. I think it's fundraising, which means politicians spend all their time fundraising and actually don't have human relationships with each other very much. I think hyper-partisan media, of which Fox is probably the best example, have some impact on it. But, members of Congress, these are, if you want to look for a group of people who really aren't on the internet very much, that's them. I mean, I don't think it's what's driving it.
Siva.
So part of the phenomenon of the punditocracy is indignation. That's the currency. And indignation is a subset of the attention economy. In order to appear on CNN at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, in order to appear on Fox News at 7 p.m., you have to say something that angers somebody, either directly in their face, I'm angering you as someone who disagrees with me, or more likely, you gather people on your side to be angry. It's why MSNBC is filled with former bloggers. It is because they're already adept at generating indignation toward one side or the other.
And is this a mind-closing exercise, or is this just meaningless entertainment?
I think the results are.
It does have an impact.
Mind-closing, yes.
Okay, let's go back to questions.
I don't really hear anyone saying that information moving quickly and lots of information is closing our minds. I hear not the internet, but internet companies or even personalization is closing our minds. So my question for the team arguing for the motion is, would something that wasn't corporate, like a public search engine alternative to Google that's nonprofit and not commercial, solve some of the problems? And then my question for the against the motion team would be, would you be opposed to something like that as a policy decision because you love personalization so much?
And I'm assuming that this public service search engine would not be doing personalization.
Well, perhaps there could be a social aspect, like, town halls
All right.
are
Let's-
sort of public spaces.
so
You could
the
have
answer is
internet public
perhaps.
spaces
Let's
that are social.
The,
also.
the answer
let
to your
Siva
question
Vaidhyanathan.
is that's a really intriguing possibility of a public search facility or public search engine or some sort of non-corporate entity that would help guide us through certain issues, right? That's a nice idea, and I think it's worth pursuing and experimenting. I'm not willing to predict the results. I think the important thing is that we try everything. The important thing is that we let a few things fail, and we try to learn from our mistakes, but we do so openly, we do so deliberately, and we don't sign away so many important things to a black box.
Jacob Weisberg, your opponent.
Yeah, well, I was going to say to the Google skeptics, have you tried Bing? There are alternative search engines, but I think I don't think it's something the government needs to do. I think the idea of a nonprofit search engine is not a bad one, but I don't think it would fail to do personalization, because I think a search engine that wasn't capable of personalization would be tremendously ineffective and disappointing, and nobody would use it if it didn't know where you were, if it didn't gather any information about what kinds of things you were interested in. I
don't disagree. I was just talking about transparency.
My question basically is about cute cat theory and whether those who watch cute cat videos, when a site like YouTube gets shut down, if they're more likely to then go find out why YouTube got shut down, thus turning them into internet activists.
Okay. Eli Pariser, tell us what cute cat theory is and whether it's relevant.
I don't feel well versed in cute cat
Who's
theory,
good on
unfortunately.
the cats?
Steve actually got tenure
I'm the
for his
cat
work on
person on this panel,
cat
I
theory.
But I
right.
think
I'm afraid-
if I understand I think this is a question about whether people will rally to support these online media that they depend on when they're under threat.
You sit at home, you watch videos of cats, internet gets shut down, you go and overthrow Mubarak. If you think it's a good theory, good luck.
We actually know that it's really hard to watch YouTube in China right now. And for a while, it wasn't so hard. First of all, YouTube comes over really slowly in the People's Republic because its servers are hosted in North America. Google knows not to put the servers in China. That'd be bad news. During the Tibetan uprisings 3 years ago, YouTube basically went dark. During the Olympics, it went dark, and it's been intermittent since. And nobody has banged on the doors of the Chinese government saying, I want my YouTube. They're busy with their own video services. They're busy with their own business. They're busy clicking on their own issues, right? So it doesn't necessarily follow in that example. The other thing to remember when talking about the Arab Spring going to a different part of the world is that only 30% of the Egyptian population was online at the time, and then 11 days into the protests, 0% were. SMS was a much more important media form for doing anything, and Al Jazeera was probably the most important media form for informing people. So what happened in North Africa had very little to do with cats, cute or otherwise.
You guys have talked a lot about personalization of the internet and why that's bad, but I'm asking those who are for the motion, what about people who go and seek out information in terms of wanting to comment on articles and videos that are against their own beliefs?
Yeah, so
Eli
again,
Pariser.
it's not that it's impossible or even that hard to find information that you disagree with online. There's a great cartoon, that someone's staying up late at night and the person tries to get them to come to bed and they say, but someone on the internet is wrong. That's like the experience that a lot of us have a lot of the time. But the question is whether the daily routines that we move through online will tend to bring us into contact more with people who make us feel that way, or more with people who actually validate how we feel.
People who use Facebook frequently see all most recent messages. There is no personalization. If you use it not 7 hours a day, but just 1 day a month, then there is personalization. Because you only have 30 minutes, and you have 5,000 friends, and you have 1 hour a month to spend on it. There is no way for you to do it except for personalization.
Right, no, I agree with that. I'm just saying that the
So
effect
for
of that
for people who spend
personalization...
7 hours on Facebook every day, there is no personalization.
No, that's not correct.
There is no personalization
EdgeRank
whatsoever.
only kicks in.
Facebook
I went and
says it
met with
clearly
these
on its
right.
website.
Evgeny's right about that.
No, it's
No
not true. There's,
personalization whatsoever.
EdgeRank
Most
only-
recent items come first.
All right,
That's
we're
not
at an
correct.
impasse, and that ends round 2 of this Intelligence Squared U.S. debate. where our motion is, when it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds. And here's where we are. We are about to hear closing statements from each debater. They will be 2 minutes each. Remember how you voted before the debate, because this is their last chance to persuade you that they've presented the better argument, and you'll be asked once again to vote and to pick the winner in just a few minutes. On to round 3, closing statements from each debater in turn. Our motion is, when it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds, and here to summarize his position against the motion, Jacob Weisberg, chairman and editor-in-chief of the Slate Group.
I did like one suggestion Eli made, which is that there should be buttons other than like on Facebook. There should be a I'm not buying it button, and I would have been clicking that the whole time I was hearing this argument. The internet doesn't change human nature. It just creates new opportunities for us. Evgeny and I have talked about some of those ways tonight, and I think Siva and Eli have talked about a theoretical problem that just hasn't been supported by the evidence or borne out. Does anyone here actually think that our political system would be better off without the web's democratization of information and the multiplicity of voices? If Tim Berners-Lee had never invented the World Wide Web, do you think we'd be better off if the web or Google or Facebook and Twitter or blogs were somehow magically taken away or regulated in some paternalistic way? And I want to ask you again to think about your personal experience, because it may not be an academic study, but collectively it's meaningful. Do you think the internet is making you more narrow, or is it exposing you to ideas, people, and arguments and points of view that you wouldn't have access to without it? In closing, I just want to say the idea that you and I would be less narrow in our politics without the web isn't just wrong, it's actually preposterous. And that's why you have to vote against tonight's motion.
Thank you, Jacob Weisberg. Our motion is, when it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds. And here to summarize his position for the motion, Eli Pariser, MoveOn.org board member and author of The Filter Bubble.
So I want to read you a quote from 2 Stanford researchers from 1997. They said, "We expect that advertising-funded search engines will be inherently biased towards the advertisers and away from the needs of consumers. We believe that the issue of advertising causes enough mixed incentives that it's crucial to have a competitive search engine that is transparent and in the academic realm." Now, the 2 researchers were Sergey Brin and Larry Page, and this was just months before they launched Google as a for-profit entity. I think that version of them was right, and the motives that they use in creating these filters may not be, and in fact aren't, in our best interest. They're more likely to surround us with voices that tell us that we're great and we're right and we're good enough and strong enough. What's been interesting for me since writing the book is that I've actually been invited to come talk with engineers at all of these companies, Amazon, Apple, Google, YouTube, and Facebook. I've had conversations with people in each of those places. And it's sort of funny for me to hear people try to suggest this isn't a big part of what these companies are trying to do. The engineers know that it is. They wrestle with this every day. So if you believe that the companies whose algorithms decide what we pay attention to will tend to expose us to a broad, diverse set of sources, then you should vote with them. But if you agree with me that we should scrutinize that and that these commercial interests will tend to use that power to placate people rather than exposing them to more broad senses of view, then you should vote that the internet has, in fact, unfortunately, been closing our minds.
Thank you, Eli Pariser. This is our motion. When it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds. And here to summarize his position against the motion, Evgeny Morozov, author of The Net Delusion, visiting scholar at Stanford and Schwartz Fellow at the New America Foundation.
Well, I wish that Don Draper had a chance to respond to that 1997 paper from Google. Again, you may think that advertising is evil, but again, advertising is the kind of evil that's also inevitable. So Eli has mostly avoided the what's to be done question. In his book, he actually is much more, I think, straightforward. And he does want Google and Facebook to intervene and to expose us to more diverse information diet even, that we may normally opt for. This, I contend, is a utopian dream that is not realizable in practice. Who will adjudicate here? Do we really think that Silicon Valley is capable of this? Do we really think that Silicon Valley should be in this business? Again, you have to think about the proposed solutions. Often they're worse than the cure.
Thank you, Evgeny Morozov. Our motion is when it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds. And here to summarize his position for the motion, Siva Vaidhyanathan, chair of the University of Virginia's Department of Media Studies and author of The Googleization of Everything.
We have not advocated any Cass Sunstein type intervention. We merely want you to be aware of the problem and correct for it. Jacob said, what if we had a world without the web? What if we had the world without the web? We might get there. Let me tell you why. Because Facebook and Google and Microsoft and Apple all wish to be the operating systems of our lives. They're explicit about this. We're on the way to having a balkanized world and a balkanized society because of these gated communities. The fact is, nothing is determined here. We can decide that we like what the web was supposed to be. We can opt out of certain of these practices. We should encourage diversity, of platforms. We should encourage experimentation. We should recognize that Facebook and Google and Yahoo and Bing and Apple and Microsoft are designed to gratify us immediately, and that's great for pizza, but it's not for politics. Thank you very much. Please vote for the resolution.
Thank you. And that concludes our closing statements. And now it is time to learn which side you believe has argued best. We're going to ask you again to go to those keypads at your seat. That will register your vote on which side you feel presented the stronger argument tonight. I want to ask for a round of applause for our debaters for the quality of the arguments that they brought here tonight. It was witty and it was informative and it went places. Thank you very much to them. So the results are all in. Our motion is this. When it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds. You have heard the arguments for and against over the course of this debate. We asked you to vote before and again afterwards, where you stand on this and how persuasive the teams were. Here are the results. Before the debate, 28% voted for the motion, 37% against, and 35% were undecided. After the debate, 53% are for the motion. That is up 25%. 36% are against. That is down 1%. We have 11% undecided. The motion, when it comes to politics, the internet is closing our minds, has carried. Our congratulations to that team. Thank you from me, John Donvan, and Intelligence Squared US.